In my visit with my uncle Victor in Russia, he took me to the forest near the borders of Finland along with his old-time friend Boris. They were both proud hunters, and they wanted to show, or rather brag, about their experiences in the field. They had a bunch of stories of life-threatening hunts and how they managed to survive the challenges. Unfortunately, this manly flex were all for naught. During my visit, the casual hunt had turned into a nightmare that would humble down anyone unfortunate enough to encounter the old guardian of the forest. Regardless of experience and level of masculinity, everyone would fold before the presence of a mythical entity from the Slavic folklore. As we were trekking through the woods, Boris and Uncle Victor were sharing stories about their most memorable and admirable hunts. They were big game hunters for a very long time, and both of them had a vast experience in bagging dangerous animals in the wild. They proudly spoke of their most impressive kills and the caliber of weapons they used to achieve them, but everything they were saying were just passing through me since I had no interest in the matter. I wasn't really fond of hunting, and I was just there to spend some time with my uncle whom I have not seen for years. They eventually ended up talking over each other as their competitive nature kicked in, but their pointless argument was shunned by a subtle sound of whistle from afar. The whistle reverberated with the leaves of the trees, and the chirping of the birds were responding to the call. Boris and Victor looked at each other and said that someone was trying to bag a target. Whistling would take an animal's attention and make it pause for a while as it would wonder where the sound was coming from, and this brief moment would allow a hunter to get a good shot at an unmoving target. We carefully went towards the sound's direction in hopes to witness the hunt, but Boris giggled when he didn't hear any gunshot after the call. He assumed that the targeted animal must have ran away, which could also be the case when using a whistle for distraction. It would either work or it won't, he jokingly stated. We were about to turn away when Uncle Victor suddenly called our attention while lowering his head. We followed his lead and shuffled through the shrubs while avoiding to make too much noise. Roughly 30 meters away from where we were, Uncle had spotted a giant brown bear. All excited, Boris went past us and tried to get as close to the bear as he could. Uncle Victor was just staring at it with a worried look in his eyes. He tried to stop his friend, but he did not listen to him when he failed to give a reason why. He just whispered to himself and said that something did not feel right. He asked me to stay behind him in case the bear would become aggressive, and I just remained under the bushes while watching Boris aim at it. Victor got a bit too close, and the bear slightly turned its head when the grass rustled. But for some reason, the bear just looked away and ignored the noise. It just sat there idly even though it already felt the hunter's presence. After a few seconds, Boris took the shot. He hit the target right behind the head. The bear fell out of our sight when it dropped to the grassy ground. Boris was so proud of that one-shot kill, and he kept on boasting about it to Uncle Victor, who still felt unsure about the bear's strange behavior. He assumed that he wanted to take the shot himself when he tried to stop him, but that wasn't the case at all. The three of us walked towards the area where the bear fell down, and we were all puzzled when we saw nothing there. They searched around for any kind of trace thinking that it might have survived and escaped, but there was no single indication that the bear moved from that very spot. Oddly enough, there wasn't even any trace of blood on the ground. Boris was infuriated, and Uncle Victor tried to calm him down. All of a sudden, we heard another whistle. Boris rushed towards the sound thinking that someone was about to steal his kill. A whistle could also attract it, and it would be easy to put down a bear that was already badly wounded. It didn't even make sense that it was still alive after that headshot. Uncle Victor and I had no choice but to follow him. But instead of a bear, we discovered something else instead. As we followed Boris, we saw a cave entrance under the roots of an old tree. Uncle Victor told me to stay on a safe distance, so I just hid behind the shrubs once again while they both slowly moved closer to the entrance. They were reluctant to enter the cave since even a wounded bear would be in an advantageous position inside an enclosed space. However, we heard the whistle for the third time, and it was coming from inside of the cave. Boris and Victor looked at each other, all confused. It obviously sounded like a whistle of a human, but they wondered why he would try to attract anything if he was inside there. Boris grabbed his flashlight and shone it inside the cave, and my uncle had decided to call the person out. Few seconds later, they received a response. It sounded like a voice of an old man, and it was asking for help. The three of us cautiously entered the cave. As we reached the end, we found someone lying on the ground with blood all over his head. His face was almost all covered by his long, scruffy gray hair and beard that were tainted with blood, and he was wearing a tattered robe. His dark brown skin was very dry and wrinkled, which suggested his very old age, and he was running his long fingernails across the ground as if he was trying to get up. Uncle Victor asked what happened to him. He said that he was lost in the woods and got attacked by a bear. Uncle helped him sit up, and he handed him a handkerchief to wipe the blood off his head. He said that we should bring the old man to a hospital right away, but Boris did not like that idea. Despite of the wounded man right before him, he was still fixated in the bear that he shot. He kept on saying that it couldn't go too far because of its wound, and he should catch up to it before another hunter would find it. Uncle Victor got upset and yelled at him for disregarding the emergency at hand just because he missed his target, but Boris strongly retorted and said that he did not miss. As they began to argue, we heard the wounded old man chuckling while overhearing their exchange. We all got confused by his strange behavior, and we were completely dumbfounded when he expectedly sprang back up to his feet. The red blood on his head suddenly turned blue, and his long hair and beard became green. His wound rapidly healed while he kept on snickering. We were all taken aback by the unnatural transformation happening right before our eyes. Uncle Victor grabbed my arm, and the three of us ran out of the cave as fast as we could. And as we ran back into the woods, a pack of wolves showed up right behind us. Boris was shooting at the wolves in an attempt to drive them away, but they were quite persistent. They were right on our tail, and there was no time to aim properly. We dropped everything we had to lighten our load, and we just ran for our lives as fast as our feet could take us. Few moments later, we were finally able to lose them. However, we realized another incomprehensible problem. While all of us were catching our breaths, I saw my bag, which I dropped a while ago, on the ground. We were running in a straight direction, but we came back from where we were before. It was then when Uncle Victor told me the myth about Leshy, the trickster god and the guardian of the forest, commonly called as the Leshy. As the story described, Leshy was a woodland deity who could change his form and size, and he was feared both for his unsurmountable strength and his tendency to toy with individuals within the forest grounds. Apparently, the bear which Boris had shot was Leshy in his bear form. He lured us in with his whistles, and we were led to the cave where we saw his human form. As a guardian of the forest, Leshy was not necessarily an evil spirit. However, we clearly offended him when Boris tried to kill him. There were no traces around the area when we went to the cave, since he could be smaller than a blade of grass. However, we would be done for if he decided to transform into his giant self. Boris started to cry his heart out. He recognized his mistake, and there was nothing he could do to redeem himself from it. All of his angst and arrogance were shoved away by his helplessness and desperation. Whether we believed in the myth or not, we were clearly running in circles. Leshy was not allowing us to leave his territory. To make matters worse, we heard the shrubs rustling a few moments later. The wolves had finally caught up with us, and we had to run again. We decided to go to a different direction in hopes that we would end up on a different track, but all of our efforts were futile. Boris was begging for forgiveness all the while. We were running out of energy as we kept on passing the same trail again and again. It would only be a matter of time before our bodies give out. When we were able to gain some distance from our persistent chasers, Uncle Victor hurriedly told us to remove our clothes and wear them inside out. If the stories were true, this could be a way to get out from the Leshy's trap. We did exactly what he told us to do without any question. At this point, I would believe almost anything, no matter how silly it might sound, just so we could get out of the woods. I took my clothes off faster than I ever did, and I put them back on inside out. Boris frantically did the same, and we returned to running right after when we saw the wolves again. Unfortunately, we still came back to the same spot a few moments later. I could hardly move my legs, and my chest was already pounding out of control. As I was desperately grasping for air, I saw Uncle Victor glancing at Boris with a sad look in his eyes. He realized what we had to do, and it broke his heart. Regardless of what was said in the myth, it was solely up to the Leshy if he would allow us to leave or not. Sadly, he simply wouldn't let his shooter escape. The two of us were only getting dragged into this trap because we were running alongside him all this time. Uncle Victor walked towards his friend and hugged him while tears flowed across his face. Boris was confused and didn't know how to react. He told him to remove his boots and put them on the wrong side. Assuming that this was also a part of the myth, he did exactly what my uncle said. However, it was a lie. As Boris was putting his shoes back on, Uncle Victor hurriedly carried me on his back. He knew that I was too tired to run any faster, and I wouldn't be able to keep up on my own. With what little remained of his energy, he sprinted as fast as he possibly could without looking back. For my sake, he had to leave his friend behind so he could take me out of the trickster god's territory. When I turned my head to see Boris for the last time, I saw a silhouette of a giant blending along with the trees. The Leshy was observing us all this time, and he finally turned away. After running for about a mile long, the trail of the forest finally turned back to how it normally was. We were able to get back to the road and head home. Unfortunately, we never saw Boris again.